longer. And so those of you who are newly joined, hello, good afternoon, welcome. We're going to introduce ourselves properly just in a moment when we start off, but we're just going to wait a little bit longer just to see who else joins us. So don't panic if you're just joining us now, you're not missing anything. This is just us having a chat before we start it properly.
Yes. Susie, what have you been busy with today? He asked innocently.
It's been a busy day, Wedge.
It really has.
Yeah, we've been doing some client work, but today is the day that we launched version 5.2 of our SharePoint report. So we have been busy over the last couple of months getting that finished, and today it's actually properly gone live. So yes, and thank you for all of the work that you've done as well, helping us getting it launched and making it look very pretty as it goes up. So yes, it's been busy. Yes,
we've updated loads of parts of the website, sorted out all of our emails and marketing and tweets and everything. So we are all guns blazing on launching 5.2 of the report. Yeah. What's good about the report, Susie, apart from the fact that it's nearly 700 pages long?
Yeah, it's getting quite large now, quite hefty. So we've had a few new products added in. We've completely reviewed a couple of other ones. So we're looking at about 6 changes in total to the full listings. But we go into a lot of detail behind all of these products. So if you're looking to change your intranet, if you want to maybe even just think about something new, given everything that's been going on at the moment, then it will save you so much time. When I was a practitioner, I used to use the report to review what we were doing, and it saves so much time and research, so it really can help if it's something you're in the market for.
So you use the report and now you're producing the report.
Yes. It's quite interesting to be on both sides of it, yeah.
How long have you been with Clearbox now?
Since September. So
right. Is that
months now? Yeah, it's coming up to a year. And yeah, in fact, we found a blog post from before I joined as well, talking about the report, which is quite entertaining. So
yes, there's lots of connections across the web. Mm-hmm. So it's great to have you on board, of course, as a friend and colleague. Anyway, let's kick off, shall we? We are live on Facebook. I wanted it to be YouTube, but apparently it has to be Facebook today. But thank you ever so much for joining us here in Zoom. My name is Wedge, and I'm an intranet consultant at Clearbox Consulting. I've previously been an intranet manager for national and regional companies, and I usually sat within the internal communications team. So of course, I continue to care about content and comms. I also run the Intranet Now conference, which is usually in London, but we won't say too much about real-life conferences at this time. And how about yourself, Susie? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So you'll notice a similar colour theme with our photos. So this is also a photo of me at Intranet Now talking a few years ago. I look after the reports at Clearbox, which we mentioned just before we started. But in my previous roles, I've managed intranets for a variety of different businesses, different sizes and different industries as well. I won an award for one of my intranets, and my focus has always been on communications. And I've talked a lot about tasty beverages when I've been promoting this webinar. I'm afraid I'm only drinking water because it's so hot, but it is in a pint glass, so it's slightly different.
I've joined you in a pint, although this is a pint of coffee.
Yeah, I couldn't do a pint of coffee at this time of day. It's too hot for that.
So what we're talking about today, and it is talking about, because we're just going to have a chat around the topics. We're going to look at these 7 topics. It's all about content design. And content design, as we're going to explain, is about discovering needs. Now, if you know Zoom, you'll be able to wiggle your mouse over Zoom and you can open up the Q&A panel if you'd like to ask us a specific question. And you'll also be able to open the chat panel in case you'd like to share an observation with the group or ask us a minor question. Both Susie and I are keeping our eyes on the Q&A panel especially, and the chat panel if we can help you with anything. But feel free to share an observation with the group, even a link if you want to have any examples there. This is just a bit of a chat. We advertised it as a podcast with slides. What do we mean by that? Remind me, Susie.
basically we've got our notes, of course, because we want to try and keep it sleek and professional, but we will probably get sidetracked, and we do want to talk around the subject. So we're hoping that this will be something that you can take away and still apply and be helpful, but hopefully be slightly less formal than maybe some of the other webinars that we've done in the past.
Yes, I mean, this is our first joint webinar, isn't it, Suzie?
It is, yes, and my first ever webinar as well.
Oh, really?
It is, yeah.
Ah, well, I've done a couple of others on content design, and everyone can find the video of those webinars on the Clearbox website, clearbox.co.uk, and therefore you can see how I explain all 6 or 7 techniques fully about content design. Recently, I've been delivering writing webinars for clients. So in the last fortnight, I've delivered 19 hours of webinars.
Yes, you've done just a couple then, I think it's fair to say.
Hi there, Faiza. You've asked about accessibility regulations, and that's a little bit out of scope. That's a clever answer, isn't it? That's a little bit out of scope for our webinar today, but there are lots of accessibility regulations around the world that absolutely do apply to intranets. If we exclude anyone, including an employee, from required information, that is a legal nightmare. So not only is accessibility a legal thing in the majority of companies, but let's remember that it's a moral, ethical, and normal thing for all of us across any type of industry. Wouldn't you say, Suzie?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good answer, which I don't think I could add to it.
But feel free to mention accessibility points throughout the webinar. Let's have a look at our main topics now. We're going to get into just an introduction to content design. So I refer to it as a discipline because it feels like an approach and a growing set of techniques.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It is a discipline because you've got to be disciplined to do it. It can be something that's seen as a nice to have, but it's not always done, I don't think. But where it is done, I think you can see the benefits, and that's certainly what I've seen in my experience. It's also a good teaching tool. So for those people who may not be confident in writing or with creating anything on the internet, you can use these approaches to actually show people how to work and how they can develop what they're doing on the site.
Yes, I mean, some people might even consider content design to be a new discipline. I certainly think it's growing over the last 5 or 6 years. Let's have a look. Content design is about evidence. It's about discovering and defining needs and then meeting those needs through the presentation of content. It's content as the interface. It's about upfront planning or pre-planning. I hate that word, but content design is about pre-planning your content for your intranet and then writing stuff that meets the needs, specifically meeting the needs that you have discovered through research and through your experience. It may be about readability and page layout, but it's not just about that. While layout is important, content design is not merely about placing text on a page. In fact, it's called content design because this doesn't just apply to text. We could be talking audio, we could be talking graphics, infographics, charts, graphs, video. It's about all the forms of content that people interact with. I have seen it in practice, and I have learnt a lot from clients and colleagues who have been working in government. If you have a look at the slide, Sarah Richards pulled together content design and named it content design while she was working with the Government Design Service. And she literally wrote the book on content design, which is a unique looking book. You'll easily spot it. Check it out at contentdesign.london/book. And that goes through all the techniques and her best practices for bringing content design to your organization. I have seen it within government departments, but I haven't particularly seen it in other types of organizations.
No, I must admit I haven't either. It's, as I've said already, it's maybe something that has been done but hasn't been done properly, or it's not been done at all. I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, by the way. I think it depends on the situation, depends on the type of content, it depends on all sorts of things, time pressures in particular. So it may feel like this sort of thing is too much work, or it may be extra work on top of your normal workload, on top of what an internal communicator is already trying to do.
content design can feel like additional work to what might be your usual drafting process, but I'd like to think of it as a change to your drafting process instead of additional things. Content design is a suite of techniques, and we're not going to mention them all today. We're only going to mention a couple of them in the hope that we can convince intranet publishers of all kinds, including internal communicators, to try a couple of techniques. After all, you probably already have some content pre-planning tools out there, such as the FAQs you probably retain in a Word document among your team, and such as the Q&A documents you probably pull together for your senior leaders.
Yeah.
Oh, Giles has just told us that the link has changed to that book, I'm sorry to say. So if you have a look in the chat panel, Giles has very helpfully provided the longer URL. Thank you for that.
Excellent. And Nex has actually asked something which kind of links into what you were just saying, Wedge. So content design removes the fluff which some content creators like to see because it makes their subject matter sound more fancy. Absolutely. How do you sell succinct, plain speaking language? Hopefully we're going to cover that in today. So hopefully we'll answer it throughout the course of the webinar. If you've got any questions at the end of it or throughout, or if there's anything you want to go into more detail in, then absolutely answer the questions again. But the thing is that we know that you're all professionals, and internal communicators can absolutely rely on your existing skills and experience. So if you know that the language that maybe you need to approach people with needs to change, then absolutely do that. You should absolutely apply it where it's relevant for you. There's a way of working that can work in your business. But that may mean then that some people may wonder why they need to consider this new way of approaching things. Again, I'm not saying that's right, but there may be some of you thinking, it's like, okay, I'm sat here watching this about content design. Why do I need to look at something that's talking about pre-planning, as Wedge says, which we hate that word.
I mean, the argument, the singular argument I want to make is that content design brings a focus on what the audience needs. So in communications, and I hope many of us have been in communications for many years, we may well message shape by taking points from our stakeholders and experts, and then it's our job to message shape and craft them for the audience. Now, internal communicators have an advantage over external communicators because we can know our audiences reasonably well. But content design brings techniques to your writing practice that assures you that you're delivering what the audience needs rather than only what you wish to tell them. That's my argument. And I'm hoping that throughout today's webinar, we can cover just a couple of points that will give you additional tools to your communication skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh gosh, there's so many questions on my screen. Thank you, Giles. Thank you, Rupert. So, as I say, don't assume, uncover. Internal communications people, they have an advantage because they can know their audiences plural, quite well. But when we're drafting content, working well on the story and the topics we want to cover, we're still making assumptions about what the audience needs. So content design is about discovering needs, often through these 5 points.
Yep, so how do you find out what's missing for people? We're not talking about surveying 20% of your colleagues for absolutely every reference page and trying to break that down to subsets of who said what and what's best for them. This is about doing the minimum amount of research you can to be able to start with the evidence you need rather than only using assumptions. Your assumptions may very well be right, but this is how you can actually prove what you're thinking and what you're saying to other people. So this is about conversations with those who have the need, the subject matter experts, and also your stakeholders as well. And these are the 5 methods that you can take for this research.
So yes, these are the 5 items that we're going to, these are the 5 items that I would suggest are a good basis for content design. We're only going to cover number 1 and number 3. So number 1, desk research, the research you can do with your own resources. Number 2, usability research. This is often about UX research. I imagine if you've improved some of your digital services recently, that you will have a whole plethora, a box of user research results. So you need to get into that. And you may well have a content audit, and therefore you might have a content gap analysis. content gap analysis. So there's probably things that have been researched in the past that may not have been acted on, but they're great resources to rely on for your content design and your pre-planning of your content. Then number 3, expert research. We're going to talk about subject experts today. Number 4, user research, of course. This might mean shadowing a person during task completion. Have you ever watched a person follow a process on their computer or computers and try to achieve something? What we think might be a simple task, registering, fixing a form. If we witness their struggle, we can identify where they need additional help, and that might be content or it might be process improvements. What do employees need? What do our colleagues need? I would suggest that you attend town halls or all hands calls and just witness how the crowd reacts to the answers they get from leadership, and record the questions and any responses that people give, because that gives you an idea of what people really want to hear from your company and what they feel is missing. And then, of course, specific discussions with your content team, with subject matter experts and with stakeholders, leading the discussion perhaps in a group, what we might call a discovery day, to consider what should be published.
Absolutely. So, research methods, desk research. So we think it's about some of these things. There's probably more. This certainly isn't an exhaustive list. You may think of other things. But we think it kind of comes down to these 4 things for when you're sat at your desk and the things you can do pretty much without moving. So you might have reports, or you might have research squirreled away in a folder somewhere, maybe even something that you've done back in the midst of time when you first launched your intranet, or you may even have something that another department has done. So an HR pulse survey or all employee survey as well is a very good source of information to go and do some research and to find out what you need to do or what you could think about doing. What people are looking for is incredibly important. So this may be anecdotal evidence, so it may just be a question you've picked up on Yammer, or you may have proper reports that go through the details of what people are looking for, maybe what they've not been able to find, missing data, that kind of thing. And that can really help you uncover the things that people think are important and can't find, so you need to surface it in another way, or maybe rework the content so that the answer to their question is much more present. Yammer, of course, can always be a good source of this sort of content and a good route to the information as well. Ask questions yourself and see what answers you get back. There's no reason why you can't ask those kind of survey questions one at a time through a Yammer community. And FAQ, so those are actually the ones that are asked rather than the potentially badly titled content page that already exists. So it's actually those genuinely frequently asked questions. So again, you could use Yammer, but it also leads into the next bit that Wedge is just about to talk about.
Sure, so expert research or talking with experts. So I might mean the responsible person. This might be the stakeholder who looks after the system or who's in charge of the project, but it might just as importantly mean the expert user. So this could be a person who just naturally helps other people with the process or with the project, but they themselves are, you know, just another colleague like yourself. They're not responsible for the system, but they do use it day in, day out. They know what goes wrong. They know what to look out for. They know what's missing. They know what their colleagues don't quite understand. And it's that gap analysis, that content gap analysis that we want to fill. And of course, you'll find loads of subject experts within customer services because they know what really doesn't work well. Whatever we start with as a perfect process up here, by the time it reaches customer services and your actual clients and customers, things break down. That's why we have to call customer services so often. So they know what is absolutely missing in your process, and they probably have their own knowledge management system. The rest of the employees across the company probably don't have access to that knowledge management system. So there's a lot of knowledge and content hidden away in different silos, and customer service people absolutely know what your colleagues should know. And that's the same for the HR advisor. Now, wouldn't it be great if our intranet could reduce calls, phone calls or Yammer conversations to individual HR advisors? Wouldn't it be great if we knew what are the common questions that HR advisors get? So if we talk to HR advisors about what annoys them, what goes wrong, what do people always want to know every quarter or every annual year? If we can get that knowledge out of HR advisors and onto the intranet, we're going to benefit the company, not just HR, we're going to benefit HR, but we're also going to benefit every employee. And of course, field workers, you know, those people who you and I may not see very often. So because we don't see them, we can't be sure what their view of our processes is. We can't be sure what their view of our company is. So we need to go out and speak to them to learn what is going wrong and what is going right for them. Again, that gives us a gap analysis, a content gap analysis that we should be fixing. Suzie, you've worked adjacent to customer services, haven't you?
I have. I actually looked after customer services in one of my previous roles. So I was in quite a unique position because I looked after the kind of conversations that we're having with our customers externally through a very specific and quite unusual channel, and then also the internal communications as well. And I actually found it helped my role kind of both, it helped influence the other. And I would find out so much information through my customer services team that would actually impact the way that I shared information with my colleagues, and actually also asked some of the customer service advisors to write the odd article themselves. So actually them saying, this is something we hear a lot about, here's how you can help us. It's quite a nice approach to that sort of thing, rather than it just being a kind of update to kind of a process kind of document. There's been a conversation happening in the chat panel about the search that I talked about and using search reporting. Yes, SharePoint's analytics isn't always fantastic, shall we say. There are intranet in a box products that have better analytics, and there are also non-SharePoint intranets that have good analytics as well. Some of it is, Annette just said hear that, yes. Some of it does plug into Google, so if you are allowed to do that in your business, not all businesses will be allowed to, but there are products out there that do have very strong analytics. So it's worth
and even if you haven't got analytics and you know your hit counts, consider talking to your IT people about the search logs.
Yeah.
Then they're not easy to find. They're not just there for you. You often need admin privileges. But talk to your IT about getting your hands on the search logs, because that shows you what people are wanting, and it may be able to show you what they haven't found. Yeah. That's called failure to find.
Yeah, and actually something you just mentioned there is that the hit pages on the site. In a previous role, we had a benefits page that was all about the support system that was available, the phone line that people called if they were worried about their home life, their finances, anything like that. And the hit rates were something like 10 a year. It was horrendous because it was squirreled away somewhere, it's hidden away. So that lack of analytics, the lack of hits, was also a good way of seeing actually maybe what people are looking for as well. So we've pulled those two out of the list of those 5 things because they're kind of the easiest, they're certainly the cheapest because you don't really have to go anywhere and spend any money to do it. And now we're just going to talk through another cheap technique.
Yes, we're just going to cover a couple of things today. So to move to an actual technique that we would like more people to be excited about. So job stories, this is about defining the one thing that must be covered. So a job story is for a specific task for a specific audience. And every page should satisfy a job story. Certainly every reference page should satisfy a job story. Here's a template on screen, and Suzie, you've got a couple of examples.
I do. So I'm going to use the same example, but look at it in 3 different ways. So hopefully you'll understand what the example is as I read them through. So a normal person, a normal member of a company, a normal person. When approaching the office in my car, I want to know which car park to head for and how to get in, so I can park without additional help and get to work on time. But then a manager may need to know when my people hear there will be a new car park. I want to know if or how the security arrangements have changed so I can brief my team correctly with the parking details. And then maybe looking at someone really specific, say a receptionist. When a novel issue is logged about the car park that our team has no experience of, I want or even need to find who to contact for expert guidance so that I can engage the right people to solve the problem and close the issue.
So the job story template is very easy and clear, and hopefully many of you will recognize it from UX and usability and user research and all of that good stuff that we've done in the past. If we bring that to our content, we can write a job story that expresses everything that our page must satisfy. And writing a job story can be quite a challenge, and I suggest that you draft it and share it with your content team or the stakeholder to ensure that it says everything that must be satisfied. I consider it a touchstone. The job story is something that you need to come back to time and time again as you draft your content. The big thing is that your content must satisfy the job story and nothing else. This is a fantastic tool for pushing back when a stakeholder says, oh, just add a paragraph about whatever they want to communicate. You know, when you've got a good story or a good reference page that does a good job, and then your stakeholders add additional cruft, decoration, additional details, context, all good stuff perhaps for a news story, but for a reference page that is supposed to help somebody achieve something, the job story is a fantastic tool to push back and say, no, this page satisfies the job story and you did approve the job story, so we're going to finish here. So Susie, this obviously works really well for short reference pages and those how-to guides that we love on the intranet. But could a job story make our news dull and boring when it comes to intranet homepage news? What about engagement and persuasion?
Yeah, so one way to think about it is that one of the most engaging things you can do for an audience member is to show that you're thinking about them when you're writing for them. So if something is relevant, specific, helpful, direct, it understands them, then it should be engaging kind of naturally. So if you think about it out of kind of writing mindset, out of a writing situation, there's a difference between having a team meeting where you're set an action and it's in front of everybody and the conversation that happens around it is kind of one way. But then if you have that same action set for you one-on-one with your line manager, and you get that kind of slightly broader breakdown and it's set specifically for you, then that action maybe is slightly more engaging. So for practical and clear communications, this approach could be right, but I think it should be a starting point rather than a rigid framework that you work around.
So if it's relevant, it's helpful. So that's the good thing.
Yeah.
But content design is often also about simplifying language to the point that it becomes very concise and succinct. There's me using too many synonyms against the guidelines. Whereas internal communications can be quite rich when we consider language and how we speak to and for and with our colleagues. So yes, there's something about content design can reduce the content, the context of our news pieces, because when we're drafting our news pieces, we often follow the journalistic inverted pyramid because we want to cover who, what, why, where, when, and how. Who, what, why, where, when, and how. Yeah, I think that's it. Because we want to explain and persuade and show our working. We don't just want to tell people and inform people things. We want to bring them along the journey. So I do worry that content design could eradicate context. However, if it's a starting point, content design will ensure that your pages, your reference pages especially, are relevant and helpful, which is absolutely crucial to make a universally helpful intranet. But for our homepage news stories, yes, I think there's a lot of scope to add conversational context and meaning, lower down the page.
Yeah, I think you're right. Context is really important, and something that can be missed out of following the job story guidance is you can miss the elephant in the room. So if you stick to the job story, then you may not cover the unspoken questions. So using the example that I've given around the car park, if the car park is changing, perhaps it's shrinking, and not everyone will now have a car parking space for whatever reason that may be. You kind of have to address that elephant in the room of people thinking, well, if there's not enough places for people to park, then does that mean they're going to get rid of people because we're actually shrinking the size of the company? So you're going to end up missing maybe some of those things if you stick with the job story.
Yes, I see what you mean. Whenever we publish something, there will be perhaps a large percentage of our colleagues that go, what's really going on?
Mm.
And it's not paranoia. It's just that if we don't provide enough detail, people will imagine the detail based on their own experience.
Yeah, and
So,
arguably that's happening more and more now as well, as you see people kind of reacting on social media. So it's more of a natural mindset now to question things.
So as good communicators and perhaps change management comms, we want to anticipate what people truly care about. So the job story may be overly concise and overly specific. It's clearly relevant and useful, but it may not assure people of what's going on behind the change. So we need to remember our usual internal communications principles and good change comms as per usual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and we've just got a couple of questions. Cecilie asks if a job story can be a substitute for personas. So what we might have explained is that that's a no from me, because what we haven't introduced you to is the user story.
Yeah.
And we haven't introduced the user story because we suspect it's the first thing that comms people will not do. A user story expresses the person's need, but we assume that internal communicators have an advantage because they may feel they're closer to their audiences, and so that they might have a better understanding of what their audiences needs. But in my previous webinar, and the video is over at clearbox.co.uk, go to our resources menu, I have gone into user stories. And Cecilia, I would say compare user stories with personas. Personas can be very general, even if you've got 8 of them, whereas user stories are very specific. So I encourage you to investigate user stories. Susie and I worry that internal communicators might miss them. Yeah. And so we're focusing on job stories today because we are certain job stories are useful.
Another way to think about personas and job stories, of course, is that you could use your persona to drive the job story. So your persona could be the person you're applying the job story to, if you wanted to look at it in that way. So you could almost, if you're exploring personas in an early stage of an intranet project or as part of a broader project, then the job story can work alongside that as well, potentially.
Yes, of course. Your 3 examples, Susie, they were for different people.
Yes.
So they may have been driven from a user story, 3 user stories, yeah. Or they could have been driven from 3 personas, of course. So, yes. So, we're not touching user stories today because we've only got a conversational webinar for you today. My previous video has dived into them, but we're really keen on job stories. We think it can really improve the knowledge management and the reference pages of your intranet. There's such a benefit when explaining your content plan to stakeholders and experts, because if the job story is well written and specific, your stakeholders will go, oh right, that's exactly what we need to do, and it will assure your stakeholders that you will write the correct content.
There's another question as well, just before we move on, from Alistair, which is about if you ask teams such as customer advisors to write their own intranet content, what guidance do you provide them on writing good and relevant content? So the example I gave was writing a news story. So it was around addressing a particular issue maybe that's been surfaced through customers and speaking specifically on that particular topic. But there's no reason why they couldn't create content as well, or certainly even be editors of a process that's been written to make sure that it makes sense from their perspective, because they'll probably be the ones that are applying it when a customer gets in touch, or even if a shop, a location, a restaurant, whatever it is, gets in touch with a particular question about it. So the guidance that I would give for that sort of thing would be the same as we're doing here. So if it's something that's going to be a permanent reference piece, then invest a bit more time in talking to them about how it should be written, looking at things like the job stories, the skeletons that Wedge is going to move on to in a moment. But then if it's something which is just a news story, which is them explaining a situation, I would just ask them to write something. In theory, a customer service advisor should be able to craft emails to customers as part of what they're doing. They may have to adapt a template if it's not quite right. So even if it's just a first pass, I would say it would need to be run past whoever it needs to be run past, but allowing them the freedom to write the story kind of as their own experience, as a good starting point anyway.
I mean, there's a governance issue here, Susie, and as with all governance models, we flip between very strict centralized intranets, then 5 years later we loosen things up and we accept a great many more writers and publishers.
Yeah.
Maybe 5-10 years ago, I was a big fan of having an open intranet where most people could edit their reference pages. So if you are an expert in this process, you should be able to edit and amend that page. However, I've seen Jerry McGovern speak so often about poorly maintained content. And I know from my own experience that we can all be very excited about creating and publishing a brand new page, but few of us can remain passionate and excited about maintaining and editing that page in the future. And so Jerry McGovern would remind me that intranets can eventually become tens of thousands of pages that have no governance because we assume that everyone is looking after this page. So right now, I prefer more centrally managed intranets. That doesn't mean it has to be one center. There might be 3 centers, you know, the customer service center, the field worker center, as well as the corporate commerce center. But it's a governance issue and it's a principle to be debated.
It is, which we won't cover now, but it is, you're absolutely right. Whatever the guidance is, it should work within the guidance of your own site. So if you have a very strict governance or if you have a very open governance, whatever, that needs to work alongside whatever kind of instruction you give to someone if they were to publish something.
And Susie, not to go on too long, but you and I are working with content right now with clients, and we know the intranet publishers are asking for guidance. And what they expect is actual writing guidance about sentences and hyperlinks and headings, but they also expect house style, the house style guide around lists and color, semicolons. And they also expect page templates that guide the look of a page.
They do, yes.
What else have they expected?
Oh gosh, that could end up being quite a long list. So things around the tone as well, even just basic things about whether there should be a page about something, whether it's an attachment or how linking to different content is, where something lives. It is a whole big thing. So I summarise in my response with the guidance to provide. Yeah. It needs to work within whatever framework you've decided. But you should always ask them to create something as a skeleton, because that's a good way to check something before it then goes too far.
Yes, so, you know, we experts, if we're allowed to say that, we might write the job story, but we're going to move on to my favourite tool that anyone could use. So your subject expert could hand you their skeleton for you to finesse, or you could work up a skeleton with them for them to finesse. So again, we're talking about comms pre-planning. We are still not drafting any content. Okay, so this isn't a codified content design technique, but rather something I've developed over the years with my stakeholders, and I'm certain you do something similar. What have you done, Susie, with your stakeholders to plan content? Has it been about writing lists?
It has a little bit. This is a technique I think that might resonate with some of you. It's certainly something that people try to encourage me to do at school, and I must admit I never did it, but I wish that I did now. I've sat in meetings, I've been with a group of senior managers, and they've kind of mentioned things and I've made a note of them and then taken that away to go and turn it into a piece of communications, because those senior managers probably don't draft anything, or they potentially don't even write anything for the intranet. So you have to take those notes away and then turn them into something, or even as a side mention, a side note. We must all do that when you're sat in a meeting and you suddenly think of something, or something that someone says sparks another idea, and that side note then becomes a kind of group of side notes that gets developed further.
Yes, I remember walking corridors with senior leaders, and whatever they said, I had to take down, or my manager would take me for a coffee. Actually, it wasn't a coffee, but we don't smoke anymore, do we? My manager would take me for a coffee, and she would download to me. That's how she would put it. She'd say, Wedge, I just need to download to you. And I would scribble my list, and she would trust that I have the major points, and then I could go away and consider the draft. But after she'd downloaded to me, she would forget. So the download was really important. So the process is on the screen now. It's just 4 steps, really. It's lay out your bullet points to cover everything. That's the download. Don't care what you write, just get it all down on paper or screen. Then you rework the list. You order it from must know down to nice to know, and that context that Susie and I said was important. Then you consider your subheadings, because when we think about readability, people generally will always read your subheadings, and that's not true of all your paragraphs. And sure, think about your headline as well, but don't set your heart on it. You'll probably need to come back to your headline after you've drafted your content. So here's our first list. Susie, would you like to go through that?
Yes, so write out bullet points. Write your skeleton just in a bullet pointed list. Use your job story, apply it to what you're writing. If you get 30 bullet points, something has possibly gone wrong. So that's not really a page that anyone's going to be able to quickly reference. But if you decide that 5 bullet points is appropriate, or a dozen is, then it is up to you. There is that flexibility there to do that as well.
What you can see on screen is, this is just the download. It's the first pass skeleton. And I've got my job story on screen to remind me what I'm supposed to be caring about. Joe, yes, we'll be sharing the video and the slides. We'll send you an email after this webinar for sure thing. So let's have a look at the second pass. So it needs to flow well. So I've gone through my list and I've rearranged things from top to bottom, from the must knows at the top to the nice to knows at the bottom. I've highlighted my changes in green and with the icon. Why have I used an icon as well? Because of course we must never communicate only with colour. That's an accessibility guideline. So your ordering might be different to mine, but the point is we're following a process, a reproducible process that anyone can follow, and we're relying on our expertise, of course. I'm referring to my job story, and there's a peek at the user story as well. We are fans of user stories. We just recognise that some people might miss them.
Absolutely. So then, moving on to the third pass skeleton, we've got the job story here again as well, and the user stories. There are more changes in green and with the icon next to them. That's because we've now added in subheadings, and that helps to reflect on the content. You may now find, because you've put a subheading in that's interesting and engaging, that actually you need to expand on what you originally thought, or maybe you've realised now that you've missed something from your original plan. Subheadings are really important, even on a short article. They help people's eye jump around the page, and of course people only read what they really want to, and really only read what they need as well, so they may skip bits, and subheadings gives them that really good visual cue that there's something there that maybe they want to look at, and they can go straight to the best bits that's relevant for them. And of course, you're probably all aware of the F reading approach, that people scan the top line of something and then will look down the left-hand side. That approach with subheadings means that, again, there's that subset to make them realise that, hang on, there's a gap, there's something's bolder or something in a bit larger font, however it will work, to show that there's something here that maybe they should look at. And it turns it from being an F into more of an E, or maybe a weird ladder kind of shape.
Yes, other reading patterns do exist, but on a reasonably plain text page, F has stood the test of time. It's been researched by Jakob and the usability.com people. Is it usability.com? Excuse me. So that's the skeleton. I'm sure you do something very similar. All we've done here is formalize it so you can share it with your colleagues as a way to start drafting before you draft your article. So, moving to approval. And this isn't approval of your draft. This isn't approval of version 9 of your article. This is about getting approval before you start drafting. So review and approval is standard within internal communications, but in content design, content designers do not seek approval. Rather, content designers ask for critiques, which is about improving the content rather than approving the content. So they would bring together a number of people to do a critique, which they call a crit, and they would discuss how to improve the content. And of course, you might get some suggestions like, oh, why don't we add a bit about the cost? And then you just go back to the job story and you say, oh, thank you for that idea. Referring to the job story, we'll need to consider that or not. If it's not in the job story, it just doesn't get put in. Not every suggestion has to be accepted. Now, I can understand that comms people will still need approval to publish. We're all dealing with time-sensitive reference pages about the car park or something more important, and time-sensitive news stories. So of course we need that green light, that actual approval to publish, and that's where communication starts. But when we're considering knowledge management and improving our reference pages of a section of the intranet like HR or customer services or the actual knowledge management system, we're looking to improve the content always, not approve it, improve it. So I think it's a great idea to have the job story to define the problem and the skeleton to demonstrate the substance of your proposed article. If you get the job story and the skeleton approved by your stakeholders at the same time, the job story explains what you intend to do. This is why I'm writing anything. And then the skeleton shows what you will write. So there can be no surprises. The job story and the skeleton sets expectations. So if the stakeholders agree with what you've proposed, there'll be no surprises when they see your draft.
And it's important to think about this beyond it being just one article as well. So there's swathes of content that's needed across the intranet, and some of it can be incredibly practical or kind of nice to know. Think about those publishers that maybe aren't very experienced with writing, with content layout, who may need more help. Bless them, I'm going to use health and safety as an example because it's always a good solid one to choose. They write in a very specific way, which may not be the most engaging way or the most clear way in the way that you want to communicate as a business for your users. So the job story and skeleton approach will either help them to focus on what they need to do. So it could be a process that you encourage them to follow and will help them understand what they're trying to write and how they should write. Or if you are taking on the responsibility for reworking their content with them, then this process will give a very structured way of approaching it and again help to explain to them what you're trying to achieve, and will help you get that sign off and to help you work through that content.
We were saying this morning that we've both got a little bit of background in health and safety, haven't we?
Yes, reworking the content. So in a previous role, I did rework the content for a lone health and safety person. So she was incredibly busy, and she genuinely didn't have the time to completely rework all of this content that had existed for years before she'd even joined the business. So I agreed to help her rework it. And actually I used a very similar format to this to try and help lay out and start to explain what I plan to do so that I could draft one area within health and safety, or one particular topic, show her this is the process that I'm following, this is how I'm thinking, for her to say yes, that's fine, and then I could go off and look through all of the other content and become the most trained person in health and safety in the business, probably, from rereading things several times. But you had an example as well, Wedge, didn't you?
Oh, well, I was just a lowly EHS officer. I was thinking about getting qualified, but mostly I spent my time in document management. And if I said that our project was £1 billion project, you might even be able to guess what it was, or back in the day. But I learned a lot of vocabulary, and I learned how to instruct people to do things rather than persuade people to do things. Yeah. So it was very valuable for my writing career.
Excellent.
So to conclude, job stories, but skeletons especially, are invaluable because they ensure you do not deliver something that is unexpected or unwanted. You don't want to spend 2.5 hours drafting something that just gets thrown away and surprises people. So job stories and skeletons, get them reviewed and approved by your colleagues and your stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
So we've just got 3 slides about writing. As we're only focusing on content design techniques this webinar, we're not going to tell you how to write good comms.
Absolutely not. So because the job stories and the skeleton should be very clear, everyone should know what's coming. There shouldn't be any surprises. So when the review cycle comes, there should be maybe fewer pain points. There should be fewer, maybe we need suggestions as late ideas to some content. So it can really help with your writing in that sense.
Exactly. You know, when I'm writing a short or possibly a longer article, I don't want new ideas when I'm on version 9 of the document. I would love new ideas at the skeleton stage.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we said we wouldn't tell you how to write, but here's what we think supports good communications. Would you have anything to add to this list of 9 points?
The main one that's missing that we've talked about a little bit with the governance side of things is the internal guidance. So more around, though, in this example is the style and tone, and also the channels as well. So you need to know the channel that you're going to be publishing your content to,
Yes.
or multiple channels that you're going to. So if you're going to publish something on Yammer, then maybe you need to consider a hashtag among your skeleton to make sure you're including all of those things. So referring to that internal guidance is really important.
About channels, here's the phrase I always use: match the message to the audience to the channel. If you know what the audience needs from you, you can craft a message for them, but it has to be appropriate to the channel. Email is different to an intranet page, Yammer is different to email, a text message is very different to everything. So match the message to the audience to the channel. That's my comms principle. Content designers, on the other hand, have these 4 touch points. Content must be in the audience's vocabulary, not in mine, not using my favorite synonyms or Latin, but in the audience's vocabulary and only what they expect. In the best format for the audience, so that's about medium format and channel. They need it where they expect and want it. And of course, it has to provide what the audience needs. Sometimes we talk about what people want, and I think that's worthwhile, that's valuable. We have to talk about what people want from their work, but much content has to satisfy what they need to get their job done. And it should start with data or research results. Now, at the beginning of this webinar, we talked about the minimum research you can do at your desk and by talking to subject experts. So that's what we mean when we say start with research, don't start with assumptions. Do you think these are realistic, Susie?
I think they are sensible and I think they're needed, but they can be difficult to do at speed. So we're all very busy and we're all trying to get things out very, very quickly. So it can be difficult to do these things. But at the same time, it may be, Lorena just said Latin quotes the worst. Yes, I agree with you. Arguably, so when you are moving at speed, you could say that this is when this careful approach is most needed. So if you think about the situation we're all in now, with COVID, there's never been a time where a careful approach to this sort of communication is more important, to be clear with people, because there's so many impactful things that are happening and have happened over the past few weeks. So a focus on the audience and delivering what people actually need. So points 1 and 3, particularly at the moment, are really important, I think, from this list of things.
That's our argument. You know, we already respect that everyone has their approach to communications and their approach to writing, experience and expertise. And what we're just saying is, rather than making assumptions about how we know our audience is, we need to be audience focused rather than topic focused only. Alrighty, well, we've done reasonably well for time. We will make this video and slides available to everyone who registered. Thanks ever so much for joining us here. Thanks ever so much again for the questions. And also, if you've got the chat panel open, there have been some good observations and links shared. So I do encourage you to open the chat panel, and we're happy to take any further questions from you now. Susie, is there anything from in the chat panel now while other people think about questions?
Yes, so Pfizer, apologies if I've not pronounced that correctly. How do we marry the business needs if these are not user needs but have to be interpreted to be user needs? And an organisation wants its staff to know these may or may not be user needs. So the job, I think you're referring to the job stories there. So the job stories should reflect the business needs. So if you, using the car park example again, you are trying to communicate as a business that there is a new car park. There's nothing more to it than that. That is the message, that the car park has been reduced in size because there's a new tenant in the next building, and so your landlord has said, nope, sorry, you've actually got to use the number of spaces you've been assigned. But that doesn't mean that those people don't want to know those extra things. So although the business may want to communicate a specific thing, you will know your audiences. You will know what some of the questions some of those people will ask. So those people that are currently hot desk, who now don't have a car parking space, does that mean they can continue to come to that building, or will they have to start working from home? There's those kind of little things that you just need to be able to pick up, which can come through the job stories and the skeletons. I don't know if you want to add anything to Wedge to that.
I think it's right to recognise the tension between user needs and business needs. The business needs to make money. That's what sustainability is usually about. And user needs may be about getting tasks done, and those tasks are absolutely necessary, but they may not entirely fit in to the business strategy, and yet they still have to be done because that's how we get work done. There is a tension between user needs and business needs. Now, I've always thought of internal communicators as being a bit of a bridge, not a megaphone. I hate that analogy, but I do see internal comms people, and especially intranet people, as being allowed to roam across the business, up and down the business. Forget the ivory tower. Internal comms people can get anywhere. They can get on a quad bike and go out into the field. So comms people and intranet people, we have a wide view, I hope. So there is a tension between user needs and business needs, and it's up to us to marry them as comfortably as possible. Ulrika, I think you've got a question. If you can open the Q&A panel or wiggle your mouse over Zoom and open the chat panel, we'll be happy to take your questions in the Q&A panel.
I've got a question for you. I'm going to ask you, Wedge, from Lorena. Have you got any good content guidelines pages or sites that you can share as part of it?
We have, if you'll forgive me grabbing a link. So at Clearbox, we do talk about content, and I have written a guide, but I think it's 5 years old now. So I'm going to share the guide with you, but excuse me, it is 5 years old. So here's my intranet content guide, which I'm putting into the chat panel now. However, I wrote that before I learned anything about content design. Oh. So what we also have, if I head to the resources menu of our website, we also have some content quality tips, which I'm going to put into the chat panel as well. So if you open the chat panel, you'll see I've popped a couple of links, and that's our guidelines. However, contentdesign.london have also published readabilityguidelines.co.uk, which I will pop into the chat panel as well as soon as I can type it. It's coming up. And the point of the readabilityguidelines.co.uk is that they've been developed as a wiki, so they are a consensus of English-speaking communicators and how they believe style and tone should be used to ensure that everyone can understand your content. So loads of links in the chat panel just now to help you with that guidance.
Yep. And there's a nice example there between the difference between wants and needs. I want a Ferrari, but I need as a utility vehicle.
What I need is to get to work on time. I might want a car, but I might want a decent train.
Yeah, exactly.
Lorena, thank you. It's been a pleasure watching your comments and questions come in. Thank you ever so much. Oh, Joe, is my page? Yes, my links went wrong. Excuse me. Let me grab. I've had copy and paste errors today. Thank you, Joe. I've popped the correct link in. So I've done one report, which is a PDF you can download, and I've also got some content quality writing tips, several blogs and a couple of videos. Thank you.
They are very good. I was going to say, make sure you watch his videos. They are very, very good.
Well, I do go on a bit. So just remains to thank you ever so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to see your comments, questions and observations. Susie, it's great talking to you like this. I hope we can do this again in the future. Congrats on your report, which is on screen right now. If you want to say again what's good about a SharePoint intranet.
Yeah, so we have 55 products featured in the report. 33 of them are full listings, 22 of them are summary listings. It's well over 650 pages with hundreds of screenshots that you won't get anywhere else. If you are in the market, or if you are even considering a new intranet product, then you can go ahead and you can download this. If you want a little sneaky peek, then there is an executive summary that will give you a flavour of what's in there and the approach that we've taken. So we analyse all of the full listings with 8 business scenarios, so you can compare and contrast them, as well as get our expert opinion on it from independent experts who have reviewed it. It's right there at that URL, so clearbox.co.uk/sp-intranet. And I do believe that that is a discount code. So if you type in my name, S-U-Z-I-E, Susie, into the voucher code field, if you want to download it, then that will apply a 10% discount.
Yes, and I should emphasise it's brand new today. This is version 5.2, an improvement on 5.1, an improvement on 5.0, and we literally published it today after weeks of tweaking and re-reviews.
Yeah, that's the need for makeup today. There are a few bags under the eyes, so
it's been fun.
It has been fun, and this has been very fun as well. So thank you very much, Wedge. Thank you, everybody. It's been a lot of fun talking this through. I hope it's been helpful, and hopefully we will do this again.